Bend all the way down. Here comes the bull of the woods. I guess I could be pretty pissed off about what happened to me. But it's hard to stay mad when there's so much beauty in the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm seeing it all at once, and it's too much. My heart fills up like a balloon that's about to burst. And then I remember to relax and stop trying to hold on to it. And then it flows through me like rain, and I can't feel anything but gratitude for every single moment of my stupid little life. You have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm sure. But don't worry. You will someday. Welcome back to the Eclectic Podcast. This is episode number 18. I am Josh Holbrook, and I'm sitting here with Jonathan Crass. Jonathan Forbes Crass.
Hello.
That little introduction was a little closing monologue that Kevin Spacey delivered in my favorite film, American Beauty. Thought it was just a poignant little piece of poetry.
Oh yeah, it's a masterwork of a film. Anybody who's watched these podcasts with any regularity would know what ardent fans we are of American Beauty.
We do sing its praises quite often.
But yeah, that ending monologue kind of almost like sums up the whole message of the movie, I guess, in one nice little blip.
Yeah, it does. A summation for that great message that the screenwriter infused into that script. Just a great movie.
Yeah, really is.
Well, I'll hand it off to you. I think you have a few topics in mind to get us started here today.
Well, I think really only like one or two, but it'll suffice to get us rolling, at least. I've always had an interest in quantum physics, kind of the study of reality and the universe and all that stuff, and how everything interacts. I've been reading up on some interesting developments, and a lot of this stuff isn't entirely new concepts, but these physicists and scientists who are running these experiments are getting more sophisticated ways to definitively answer the question of if these conjectures are true or not.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll start out by maybe in layman's terms going over some of these ideas that are put forth and reinforced by these experiments, and then I'll kind of possibly go into what some of the implications may be. So first concept is quantum non-locality, which is it's kind of a counterintuitive notion that supposes the idea that the same particle can exist in two locations simultaneously, across the world, across the galaxy, across the universe, two places at once. Which is...
Isn't that a trip?
Yeah, big trip. Wave-particle duality. For a long time there's been a back and forth kind of debate in the scientific community about if light is a particle or a wave, and there's compelling evidence for both. So there was an interesting study done recently that we've kind of known for a while in modern physics and stuff, that depending on the situation it can behave as either a wave or a particle. And in this particular experiment they're talking about light.
Is that the double slit experiment of which you speak?
Yeah, that's one of them. That it like identified photons or something for the first time, I believe. But these experiments with wave-particle duality are mostly pertaining to light, but the implications are that that possibly every particle in existence is basically functions as a wave, and it is a wave condensed to a very tiny space, which is interesting in and of itself. But yeah, wave-particle duality is the phenomenon by which all subatomic particles seem to behave as both a particle and a wave, and they can do so simultaneously according to this latest experiment. It's not just like, depending on the situation, it's either one or the other. There's some spooky happenings that suggest that they are one and the same.
Yeah.
Which is another big trip.
Yeah, the implications are so astounding and mind-boggling. Just to pause right here, do you think that, would you say that maybe the reason that these experiments are being done with light, or the reason that we're able to measure this to some extent with light, is maybe because light is, for us right now, it's maybe the easiest or simplest way to do these experiments. It's like light is the most like basic, like rudimentary thing that we have to play with, so to speak.
Yeah. I would venture to agree with you, but that being said, I'm pretty uneducated on a lot of this kind of stuff. But what I do know is that running these experiments, you require some pretty sophisticated equipment.
Yeah.
And say they wanted to test particles in a human being, it would probably require dismantling that human being to get them into these sophisticated instruments. So probably not very practical. But there is probably other practical wavelengths we could study. They're just not as visible to the naked eye, like radio waves, electromagnetic waves, X-rays, stuff like that. We could probably run similar experiments on stuff like that, but it's not visible with the naked eye.
Yeah, maybe they're more difficult to measure, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Possibly. I really don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't either. That's just my wild guess at why light is the what's being used in these experiments. But anyway, continue what you were saying.
Well, just to stay on the same topic for a minute, there was this quote that I read when I was reading up on the wave-particle duality experiments that really piqued my interest, but it's eluding me right now. But it was something to the effect of that basically everything in the universe that we see, even as like solid substances and stuff, is really just a persistent illusion of wavelengths, and not really even there.
Yeah,
which
I've seen that quote somewhere too before, or that study or whatever that suggests that all matter around us is really like it's like overwhelmingly 90-some% or whatever. Actually, when you get down to the base, most microscopic, tiny level, it really is empty space.
Yeah.
Like, so even us, we're made out. I mean, we're barely here almost. Like, we're made of more empty space than anything else. Which is
99.99% of all atoms is empty space, and atoms are the building blocks for all matter. So everything is 99.99% empty space.
Everything in existence, because we, and here's another quote, human beings are a tiny universe of atoms, but we are an atom in the universe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's again, this is something that's so far over my head, but it's fun to ponder.
Goes into that whole hologram theory, which we're both kind of familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another little aspect of quantum theory that I kind of wanted to go over here was quantum entanglement, which is the instance in which two particles become entangled so that actions performed on one particle affect the other. they seem to behave as if they're still connected, even if separated by vast distances. So, that's been known for a while. There have been these experiments that were pretty conclusive about that subject. You know, it's not new news, but they recently, I think, thank you, in April
Of this year?
April of this year, they did these experiments to test how quickly these entangled particles communicate. And
so this is just a study this is only a few months old.
yeah,
So this is cutting edge.
pretty cutting edge, yeah. And what they found was that as low as we could go into like nanoseconds and minuscule fragments of time,
Yeah.
there was no time lapse between the communication of these entangled particles, even if separated all the way across the globe.
Yeah.
No time whatsoever. So it's interesting that the rate of information exchange from the particles...
So it's instant. It's I mean, for all intents and purposes, the human being can measure it. It's instant.
Yeah.
There is no time lapse.
What they concluded in these experiments is that this information exchange seems to travel as quickly as 10,000 times the speed of light, which is
That's booking. That's
essentially infinite.
Yeah.
The speed of right now.
Yeah.
So that's a trip. Kind of, I have some like personal musings on these experiments and what some of the implications I think may be. And granted, I'm no physicist. I'm working on that.
Yeah, let's just pause real quick before you say that. We are not, or nor do we pretend to be educated in any formal manner about things like this. We're just two regular Johns,
Yeah.
just pondering it.
Well, I'm working on remedying that. I mean, I do have aspirations to someday be a physicist, but as of right now, I have a very weak understanding.
We have a tenuous grasp, but I would have maybe posed that maybe that's more interesting for the listener to have our layman's prism through which we filter this information and then disseminate it onto the listener.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways,
Exactly.
It's neither here nor there.
And it kind of probably makes these points we're putting forth more accessible to your average listener who may or may not have any concept of what we're talking about, in the fact that we don't have all these preset definitions in our heads that is like mumbo jumbo, you know, scientific jargon to the masses.
Yeah, we're not smarter than any of our listeners, so I mean, it should be pretty simple.
Yeah.
Or at least simple enough to understand if we can kind of grasp it somewhat.
Yeah.
Anyway, though, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
You were talking about, I think, the implications to you, what it might suggest, this experiment.
Yeah, just some of my own musings. I kind of try to make sense of things, even if it's way over my head. I tend to read a lot of things that are way over my head, and I always have to make sense of it, or I can't rest. So I try to draw my own conclusions about things and stuff. So anyway, I have some musings on the entanglement experiment, which I was just talking about. I would suppose that this information transfer at the speed of now, basically at infinite speed, which basically does away with time. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll come back to that. It possibly suggests that the entanglement connects these particles fundamentally through a higher spatial dimension. You know, anyone familiar with string theory or anything to do with other dimensions knows that there's theoretically 11 dimensions, and
by some theorists, some people say it's 4.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's 4 that we can well, 3 of them that we can observe and interact in, and the 4th one is kind of a little over our heads because we live in a 3-dimensional
if I
plane
can
of existence.
Break that down to my rudimentary understanding, I would say that all we really know is that there are higher dimensions. We don't really know the specifics, but it is basically the prevailing thought in science today that however many more there are higher dimensions above the 3-dimensional reality that we can perceive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and they would put forth that idea that there's more than meets the eye. There is other dimensions. There are other dimensions, sorry. And when I'm reading stuff like that that's over my head, I tend to take their word for it. They're probably guys who are a lot smarter than me. So if they say there's 11 dimensions,
well, they devoted their lives.
But how do they know that? Yeah. And they have all this like jargon shit that I don't understand that says this is why I know that, but I don't get it. So
just like 1,000-page tomes of algorithms and shit.
Yeah.
So it is. At a certain point, you take their word for it.
Yeah, but we've gone over the dangers of that too. So I mean, who knows?
I
think there is more.
Let's just settle on that. There is more than meets the eye. There are higher dimensions, although we don't know the specifics of what that means yet.
Yeah. So anyway, this would possibly suggest that the entanglement connects them fundamentally through a higher spatial dimension, to the point that they become essentially the same particle, but with 2 locations here in our more familiar 3 spatial dimensions, which we can observe.
Yeah, our reality.
So basically in the realm that they are entangled, they're still in the same place, they're still bonded together through whatever it is that binds them. And in our dimension, in our lower dimension, they seem to be separate, but not so in the other dimension. So separating these particles spatially, as we understand space here in the 3rd dimension, could potentially leave the entangled particles unmoved through this higher dimension, and also explain how the change on one particle still has an effect on the other at an instant rate, because they are still entangled. Yeah. And when we were talking about how this information exchange basically transfers at the speed of now, and how that the implications of time and all that, this would also possibly suggest that time as we know it does not exist in the subatomic realm, or maybe in these other dimensions.
Yeah. So if you go break things down to their smallest level, or if you start to look at the macro, like largest universal, multiversal scale we can, then time ceases to really exist.
Yeah.
Time is a human measurement. Time doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's a trip,
Whoa.
right?
Yeah. But that's what the science suggests.
And another thing that this could suggest is that these particles, which clearly exist in our 3-dimensional realm, in our 3-dimensional dimension, also exist in these higher dimensions, which is interesting to ponder too. Maybe just time doesn't exist in the higher dimensions, and when you get down to the subatomic particle level, you're observing it at its highest dimensionary point.
Yeah, like you're observing it for its true nature,
Exactly.
rather than whatever the representation that it might be easily perceived in our dimension.
Yeah. It's just trip to the max.
Yeah.
It's just pure trip factor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anybody who's interested in that anyway, I might be boring some people to death, but this stuff gets my blood pumping.
If they're still hanging on, they're probably interested.
Yeah. So, a practical example of this quantum science being put into action is quantum computers, which they have came up with some working models. It's still in its very infant stage. If you look it up, there's a huge list of like ways they could go about constructing a quantum computer. So it's still not even close to being a streamlined process where everyone's going to have a quantum computer in their home and all this shit.
We're like at the stage for quantum computers. We're like the IBM computer in the 1950s version of a PC or a laptop.
Yeah.
So that's like relatively where we're at with quantum computers, but it is on the horizon, and it is coming.
Yeah, something that is on the way, and these new machines can do far more than our current most cutting edge computers. One quantum computer would have the capacity of like all the world's. Well, let me put it this way: one quantum computer done right would have the capacity of all the world's military computers, supercomputers combined.
Oof.
Easily. They have so much more computing power to like do algorithms, like complex stuff that computers today simply cannot do. It would be a nightmare for encrypted websites, security on the internet, anything that relies on these current algorithms for security. That would be a hurdle that needs to be overcome. But essentially, these quantum computers could break into the most complex encrypted codes known to man without even breaking a sweat.
So I guess that there's the security threat of the future. There's the next war on terror in 50 years.
Our own advancement.
Yeah.
That's what it's coming to, people.
Would a quantum computer not take on? It would almost be a sentient being. It would almost be artificial, like true artificial life in a way, like an artificial intelligence, maybe.
Yeah. Well, its computing power and capacity for intelligence and data storage would far surpass anything that humans could do. That's for sure. It would be a very, very powerful piece of equipment, but it would still be a piece of equipment nonetheless. It would not act unless prompted by commands.
We would hope. Because even the most advanced computers today are, a fragment of the computing power that the human brain has. So if we start talking about these quantum computers that have, many, many times the ability of a human brain, then that's a whole new animal. That's something different, it's going to be hard to predict where that goes.
Yeah. Definitely hard to predict, and I'm very novice in my understanding and knowledge on the subject. It's just interesting, and to maybe tie it back into your intro monologue, I was gonna say this anyway when I was writing this stuff down and thinking about all this stuff, but it fits perfectly with what you said, like why stay mad when there's so much beauty in the world and all this shit. It's like, this is one small example out of the thousands, millions in the world of things that maybe deserve more of our attention as a human race, as opposed to some of the things that garner the most attention.
Yeah.
It's easy to find things to be pissed off about, and to get caught up in a cycle, I guess. But why do that when there's so much trips to be had out there?
There's so much to be curious about, There's so much out there for us to learn, and everything that I think probably that is good in people's lives and things that they enjoy, it's all something that they had to learn about to begin with. So just imagine what this 99.999% of existence we haven't figured out yet. There's all of this knowledge and all of these trips out there just this entire universe and world and just this reality, this existence for us to explore. And, you know, who knows what joys that'll bring, you know? Like, it's endless. It's, like, it's boundless. It's infinite. It's like, supremely bountiful, you know? Like, let's get out there and explore shit. Inner and outer, you know? Whatever. Like, there's just so much out there to...
Let's explore space. Inner and outer. Fuck, man. Bill Hicks. What a tragedy.
Yeah, we were, he died, it'll be like 20 years next year, so, I mean, we've been robbed of 20 years of brilliant observations about life.
So we were like, what, 7, 8 when he died?
He
of course, I didn't
died,
know who the fuck he was.
He died, in February of 1994. He was 32, just turned 32. Yeah, it always goes back to Bill Hicks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Something we bring up on every podcast ties back into the great Bill Hicks.
Man, imagine if he were still here.
Yeah, well, just the amusement from his like pop culture observations and shit. Like when he was talking all of his bits about Vanilla Ice.
Oh,
and,
he'd have such a heyday today.
Yeah, Debbie Gibson and all that shit. Like imagine today, holy Christ.
He'd probably be completely off his rocker and just insane with anger all the time.
Well, do you have any more thoughts on our subject matter?
Not so much on that, no. Do you have anything prepared? I'm kind of remiss today.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. Probably things that I could have brought up in our last two podcasts when we were talking kind of more about society. And, you know, human interactions and stuff like that, but maybe we could kind of transition back into that topic once again.
By all means, we tend to do that.
Well, it's so interesting. It occurred to me that, again, touching back on society, you know how we were talking about many times about how maybe the way that things, or the reason that things don't really change in our society very much, or that there is kind of a level of apathy and complacency among most people for major problems in our world and the direction things are going.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that maybe that comfort that people feel that mitigates their desire to change things or change themselves or whatever. It's very reminiscent of Stockholm syndrome, and you know, Stockholm syndrome is the well, it's kind of the behavior of people that have been captured or are being abused by other people in some manner. Like the classic example of the Stockholm syndrome is like you've been kidnapped by somebody, and then over time you start to develop like a bond with them, and you start to really you like them, and you don't want to leave them, and you become like their little puppet, and you no longer see them as someone that's abusing you. You see them as
to care for them and see them as like a provider almost.
Yeah, provider, exactly, because I mean, no matter what they're doing to you, they are providing you with food to survive and water or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So you become attached to them. Well, that's just, to me, that's the problem of our society today, is because that people get so comfortable with the system or their lives that they have that they don't think that, whoa, there could be something so much better than this. They're just so dazed in that level of comfort that they care for their captors, or maybe we could call it society.
Yeah.
They care for the system of society that they live in because it provides for them on a daily basis. You know, they get their meals, and you know, if we're talking about mainstream society, it's pretty, you know, simple-minded folks for the most part, and it really is like just some major societal scale example of Stockholm syndrome. I think that's just something that occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, feel free to debate that if you think that it's not an apt analogy, but
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's a great analogy. I think that the indoctrination of society, or, you know, the parallel to that in a captor and his, you know, people that he enforces his abuse on. So the indoctrination or the parallel abuse starts at such a young age that we don't realize it for what it is, because we don't know shit as little kids, you know?
Yeah.
All we know is what's presented to us. Which is kind of interesting to me to think about, like, if somebody who, like, lived in the wild their whole life and then came to society and was indoctrinated with all this shit, they'd probably be, like, really pissed off if they even understood. I mean, they'd be confused and
I bet they wouldn't even understand like the rigid structure of public sentiment towards a person about how they should live their life. So even if they could grasp that, then they probably would be pretty troubled by it.
Yeah.
Despite, you know, the thousands of perks and comforts, you know. But yeah.
Well, like, I don't know, kind of to guys like us, or, you know, like-minded people who are listening to this podcast are probably, it's a safe bet that they're like-minded.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of backwards. We're indoctrinated with all this shit, and we believed it for a long time, and now we're kind of here in our mid-20s waking up and, like, taking issue with all this shit, and it pisses us off.
Yeah.
You know, like, what's all this bullshit that we've been told our whole lives and all this stuff, and getting upset about it and actually questioning it when that should be the first thing. You know, but that's another indoctrination.
Yeah.
Don't question authority. You know, just do
Uh,
as you're told.
Yeah, I saw some quote earlier about, it said, forcing religious and societal myths on children is child abuse. And I'm inclined to agree. Like, it's a different kind of child abuse than is normally thought of, you know, when you say that phrase, child abuse. But it is nonetheless, I think, if you
not
analyze
physical
it,
abuse, but it's kind of damaging to it.
It's
to
like
the growth.
spiritual abuse
Yeah.
more than anything. Like you're removing the spirit of a person. You know, you're providing them, maybe mental isn't even right. It's like they're mentally set up to succeed in our society, to become another cog in the wheel, and you're taking care of them physically. Okay, but there's a whole other aspect, and that's the spiritual side of humanity that you're completely, you know, robbing a young person of.
You're putting it all into this little box when something as profound and multifaceted as human spirituality is beyond labeling and putting into a box. It's a self-defeating endeavor, really. That's what it is. Because they're not really gaining any understanding of the source material.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw an interesting internet meme the other day along the same lines. It had a picture of a kid with his hand over his heart and the flag, you know, doing the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
It was 4 pictures in one. And a picture of a kid in a Jewish temple, like little kids.
Yeah.
And a picture of a kid, like, how, like, Muslim countries have,
like
you know, those prayer hours or whatever.
Yeah, when they're on their, like, carpet pointing towards Mecca or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Had a picture of that and a picture of a kid at, like, some Christian seminar, I assume that. And it said above it, indoctrination. Get them while they're too young to understand.
Yeah, perfect, dude. That's what happens, you know. It's like with anything, it's hard to to quote Yoda, to unlearn what you have learned.
Yeah.
It's hard to deprogram people from what they've learned at an early age, whatever it is. And I think that it is child abuse, and I think that it's it's how the system keeps getting perpetuated as another generation comes up that's been indoctrinated into this whole thing. It's indoctrination into this illusory dichotomy of modern American society, and it's tough to pump the brakes on it, and it's even tougher to reverse it once someone's kind of been fully conditioned into that mindset.
With the wool pulled over their eyes,
yeah.
Fully brainwashed. It's and it's a sensitive issue, much like a lot of the things we bring up, because there's no handbook on how to do perfect parenting, and a lot of these parents are just, they think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They're convinced, they're trying to do the right thing, they're convinced that it's the right thing, but really, the responsibility lies on each parent to ask themselves, what am I teaching my kid here? Why am I teaching them this? Is this doing any good? Is there any other more meaningful way that I could maybe instill this message to my child?
Yeah. There's a quote by Noam Chomsky that I'll read here. It's commenting on what we're talking about, kind of the indoctrination into the system that's so prevalent today. He says the whole educational and professional training system is a very elaborate filter which just weeds out people who are too independent and who think for themselves and don't know how to be submissive and so on, because they're dysfunctional to the institutions. So, from the average parental mindset, they are setting their children up to succeed and be valuable to the institutions that are in place in this country. They don't realize, though, that they're setting a pattern for their children to be devoid of independent thought, which I would contend is the most important attribute a person can have.
Yeah, it's kind of the purpose of life, I would think, to have independent thought and meaningful experiences.
Yeah.
That's funny. It's kind of like elementary school, high school, prep school, whatever.
Tech school.
Up into, college, tech schools, universities, and grad school, and so on.
Military.
It's like a prolonged boot camp.
Yeah.
For corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is that it's incredibly profitable for the institutions in charge of our nation. Basically, what college is a huge tax on getting a good job.
Yeah, exactly. That's so perfect.
That's what it is.
That's so perfect, dude.
And I mean, I almost hate to say it because I'm, getting everything set up for myself to go to college, but, it's kind of like...
Well, you have to.
At this point in my life, what the fuck
Mm-hmm.
else am I going to do?
Mm.
Am I going to keep fucking scraping by on the bare minimum and having my little protest with the man that nobody's even taking note of?
Yeah. I know, and I mean, this isn't, and there's a lot of duality in this issue because, of course, universities and teachers, there are a lot of cool professors and teachers there, and you do get, there is a lot of knowledge to be found, a lot of really good knowledge to have.
Yeah.
It's a good, college universities are not a bad thing, but it's just the way that there's more leaning towards certain aspects of going to college to, like, certain industries and certain things that people are kind of leaned on to go into certain fields.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not it's not completely like black and white or anything, but they're definitely, the whole college system has been to some extent commandeered by, corporate America,
exactly.
The military industrial complex, mainstream society. There is that quality about it for sure.
Yeah. Well, because education, a true education, not indoctrination, they're two separate things, which is arguable. It's debatable in our modern society here in the West, because they seem to be one and the same at times. But an education is one of a good education is one of the highest achievements someone can attain in their lifetime. We're not taking issue with that because, the idea of college is good in its pure sense. The idea of education in its pure sense and its idealistic.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's like the idea versus institution thing we talked about on the podcast like real early on. What we take issue with is the way that society and mainstream thought processes have kind of commandeered the education system, and how the institution is profiting so much over it and raising tuition every year, making it impossible for people who could do great things to get into school.
Yeah, definitely. It's at a certain point now where it's kind of squelching independent thought and trying to set people on a path to perform a certain role within society. And that's, in my eyes, that's the opposite of what knowledge and education should be all about.
Yeah. It's kind of like how we talked about consumerism as the new religion. Mm-hmm. Also, education is another way to look at that. It's also a new religion in the fact that in the way that it indoctrinates people, and that's not. It's a blanket statement. It's not true all the time. There are still great teachers and great institutions and everything, but the reality remains that it's not perfect. That's for sure.
True education should teach you how to think and not what to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a quote by somebody, I don't know. So I'm not going to attribute it to them. It's mine. It's mine now.
Yeah, it's a very succinct way of putting what I was trying to get across there. You're good at that. You got to take this moment to give you your due.
I ripped that off from somebody.
Well, I know, but
it's drumming around in my head.
There's always somebody who has a better way of putting things, and at least you ambiguously credited them, even though you didn't know their name. Originality is often unrecognized plagiarism. I don't remember who said that, so it's mine.
Take credit for it. Yeah, we could go all day about that type of the education system.
Well, and we kind of have before.
Yes, we have, yeah.
It's a common theme.
Yeah. Going back to the apathy, though, within mainstream society, the whole comfort thing and the Stockholm syndrome analogy I made. There's a quote from Plato. I know who said this. And he said that the price good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. So this is something that might seem fresh to some people, like as you and me being dissidents within modern American society, that some rebellious behavior or perspectives that we have, but this has been a recognized problem in civilized societies going back to ancient Greece.
Long time.
Yeah, and so
probably beyond.
Yeah.
For him to make that,
Yeah, there had been a precedent of that going on throughout his civilization's history. So, it's like a fundamental issue that's been present with us since the dawn of human civilization. So it's, there have always been dissenters, and there have always been the sheep, and there have always been the ringleaders and the overlords and the dissidents and the martyrs. I mean, history's chock full of all these different roles,
archetypes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something we reference often on this podcast that I'd like to kind of clear the air about a little bit is that Kennedy was our last true president, and I do believe that is true.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I'm not saying that every president before Kennedy was a decisively moral man and, it was everybody was great before then. It was all roses and sunshine.
That's a good topic. We got to get into that. We haven't touched on that really, have we?
No, I mean, like, that's something I wanted to comment on before we get into it too much, is that to find someone who's in that position to lead, that is actually a convicted person, a moral man, trying to do the right thing, that is fucking rare.
Yeah, Kennedy is when we say our last true president, he might have been our only true great president, or among a small group of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Lincoln was probably up there too.
Yeah, well, when you start getting back into the 19th century and before, then it becomes really murky, because there's all these different problems in society that they were facing, the slavery and racism and women's rights, and a lot of the foreign policy excursions overseas, which of course we're still dealing with today. But yeah, probably Lincoln too. I mean,
and there's shades of gray with all of them.
It's tough to knock Abraham Lincoln, yeah. And I mean, even I want to say like Thomas Jefferson, and I'm sure there's a few presidents in there that I'm missing. I think Calvin Coolidge was a pretty honest, good person. But yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up there, that we're not trying to imply that things went bad after Kennedy and it was all roses and sunshine, like you said before, because that's definitely not the case. Kennedy, for the sake of the argument we're making here, in semi-recent history, Kennedy is the only true great president we've had.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's the price you pay for standing up for your convictions, especially in this modern world that's got such a heavy military-industrial complex presence. You know, like, you pay with your life if you go against the status quo, which the status quo is destruction, indoctrination, stealing, murdering,
pillaging, raping.
Not the right things, I would say most rational people would say. But like, I just wanted to comment on how rare that is to get someone like that in office who feels convicted a certain way and actually will stand by their convictions and see it through to the end, which most often results in betrayal and death.
Kennedy knew he was going to die too. He predicted his own assassination on many occasions. Yeah,
there was an interesting quote in that book that you lent me, JFK and the Unspeakable, when him and Bobby Kennedy were talking about something. I don't remember if it was referencing the American University address or something preceding that. But he said, "This is the night I should go to the theater," in reference to
the Lincoln assassination. Yeah, I remember reading that.
He knew it was coming.
Is that? Yeah.
But here's a man who had been sickly his whole life and near death on more than one occasion, and it probably didn't really faze him much anymore. It was time to do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's sad though. And of course, the presidents since Kennedy have been just more ridiculous than ever. You know? Like, it's so blatant. But, you know, we've talked about that before. Maybe an idea for a future podcast is let's make it our mission to find other presidents beside Kennedy in the 44 that we have so far.
Yeah.
Find a couple other ones. I'm sure we can find something in there. Like, I think I probably know by name most of the presidents, but I don't know the details of all of their administrations. So.
Well, and we could build up a list of presidents with merit that we could maybe put in that Kennedy-esque category.
Yeah.
And we could also maybe bring to light some of the unsavory presidents. And
we'll start with Woodrow Wilson. Douchebag.
Or Truman.
Yeah.
You know, we have friends who always talk about how in World War II our country was, you know, the greatest nation and all this shit. There's accounts of after the bomb going off in Hiroshima, Truman just being like totally
jubilant.
Giddy.
Yeah.
Just fucking ecstatic about murdering,
Yeah.
however many fucking people it was.
Yeah, dude, that...
We are the lone superpower!
Yeah, it was more of a message to Russia probably than anything else. Like, look what we can do, fuckers. This war's coming to an end. Watch out for us. But yeah, and you know what's even more disgusting, even than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all the firebombing raids that we did over Tokyo throughout the war, or like towards the end of the war, like those killed more people than the atomic bombs did, and that's some repugnant, fucked up shit. If you want to look up images from like all of the poor people that were just, they're civilians, man. Like we're just bombing people, and like, so that's why even in World War II, when it seems like America was just totally, indisputably doing just the right, patriotic, just thing, not even that's true.
Yeah.
We, like, look at those poor kids, man. Like, they're fucking have their faces melted off.
Well, yeah. And, like, all the people who died of radiation sickness, who maybe weren't killed in the blast, but were close enough to get that. Like, that's the main issue we take with war and stuff, and all this bullshit military-industrial complex advancement in prevalence over the world is that for the folly of a few men, you have hundreds of thousands, probably more in future conflicts. God help us, they won't arise, but they're who pay the price.
Yeah.
Good people who have nothing to do with it over the folly of these people wanting to control everything.
Yeah.
You know? And that's
want to control the chessboard.
That's one thing about life, for anybody who knows anything about life, is that once you accept what you can't control, which is basically everything except what's in your head.
Exactly.
Then you're on the right track. Those people aren't on the right track. Micromanaging fucking
people's lives, man, like it's a game.
Yeah. Pieces on a chessboard. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's funny how crimes that were committed between a few people are recognized as being appalling and garner national attention, but when the same crimes are committed on a macro scale among thousands or millions, it just becomes completely, it loses any like moral or like personal like emotion that should be evoked by such a fucking heinous act. There's a quote from Joseph Stalin, one of the kings of all time motherfuckers, but horrible human being, but he had a pretty astute quote, and I think it's even more relevant today. He said that the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of like, I forget the exact quote, but the death of like 10 million is a statistic. It loses that like personal emotion that's attached with it.
Yeah. That is very interesting. Because you don't, in a tragedy that big, on that wide of a scale, you don't see every name involved.
Well, you don't see the unreal suffering of one person being murdered.
Yeah.
You know, if it's one person, you can soak in like how horrific it is. But when it's so many, it's like, I don't know. It just blends into, well, that's what happens.
Yep.
That's
the world we live in.
Yeah, it's a war. It's a war.
It's a dog-eat-dog world out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is right now, but it doesn't have to be.
Did you see that article I sent you the other day, or link? Happened like a year and a half ago, but there was some rogue American soldier over in, I think it was Afghanistan, and he went on some rampage and killed like some 20-some like civilians. And it was aside from the fact that it's pretty horrific in and of itself, but they had pictures from it. Like, he shot these kids and like threw them in a building because, you know, of course there's not going to be any repercussions. I'm an American, you know. I'm on the right side. Some crazy fucking nut. Those pictures were fucking like, they got me, dude. Like, they were like, you saw like the kid's dad, like some like Arab guy just like fucking crying his eyes out over this like charred carcass of his kid. Like, That's what we're doing. Is that the defense of freedom? Fuck that. Fuck anybody that would even post a meme on the internet that like supports that shit. That's like the feeling it invokes in me. It gets me kind of riled up. Like, stop the complacency with this shit. It needs to end, you know?
Yeah. Get mad. Just funnel that energy in the right way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard.
You know, that's the thing we talk about a lot on this podcast, is the apathy of society. Find what you don't agree with, what doesn't sit well with you, and don't just sit idly by and accept that that's the way things have to be.
You know, it's funny, or not funny, but it's interesting that for all the soccer moms out there and stuff that have their, you know, American flag bumper sticker, and their little, right next to it, they'll have their little kid icons on there, like, oh, this fan's carrying 4 children. How many American children have died in this war on terror?
Yeah. I mean, what if the tables were turned? I think people would care a little bit more about it.
Yeah, like, there's no American children being killed, but on the Middle Eastern side, the casualties they've incurred, there have been thousands of kids killed.
Probably tens of thousands.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there were over 1 million casualties in Iraq.
Most of that shit just gets swept under the rug.
There was over 1 million casualties in Iraq. 1 million people. That's a sixth of the Holocaust.
Just Iraq. And that's just a snapshot of our military activity around the world. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's something you commented on is, like, you know, that Stalin quote, when 1 person dies, it's a tragedy. When 10 million people die, it's a statistic. It's like when you know the person, or when you can hear their story or see pictures, you feel some kind of connection to it.
Yeah,
when
human connection.
Yeah, when it's just some event that happens that all these people died, and there's like some kind of disconnect. You don't feel for them because
you just read the numbers in the article,
and there's no reaction, because that's the sick reality of the world we live in. It's time to wake up, folks. This shit ain't working. Hasn't been for a while.
It never has, and that's, you know, that's the beauty of it, though, is that we now, our generation, can be the generation that turns it all around from the entirety of human history. There's no roses and sunshine in our past. I'm gonna break it to you.
Well, I hate to be pessimistic, and I'm not. I try to be an optimistic person, but I'm also a realist. There have been dissenters all throughout the course of human history, and it's not changed thus far. I'm not saying that it can't. I hope against all hope that it does, but it's not going to be easy. It requires each person. Another quote from that JFK book. The journey to self-peace starts at self-reflection.
Yeah.
Or journey to world peace.
So true.
Starts on that level of self-reflection.
Let's start with your own self. Each person, consider yourself a little world. Mm-hmm. Get world peace with yourself. Then get world peace with your friends and the people in your community.
Then you will be equipped to go and interact with other people, with your community, and your community with the world, in the right way.
Your community with your society with the world. Yeah, it's like, it's a trickle-up effect.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I'm optimistic, man, that just the internet and just the way the access to information that we have, coupled with the access to communication that we have all across the world now, like, we could get online and go have a chat with people in India or Brazil or Russia or England or wherever.
And we can do all that stuff, but it's just words right now.
You know? Yeah, but it's, you know, I don't know. Like, our generation is the one. We're the you know, people that were born at the like the tail end of the 20th century. You know, the end of the fucking Cold War. We're the generation that came up with the internet. Like, I feel like more than any other generation in the history of our race, like, of our species, we can do it. Like, but it will be hard. It's going to be extremely difficult, but it can be. It's possible now.
Yeah, and I mean, I am optimistic about the whole situation. Like I said, I hope against all hopes, with everything inside me, that some kind of resolution to this whole global conflict and pretty much all this shit that's reached a critical mass in our modern society gets resolved some way. I was just kind of pointing out some of the hurdles there. You know, it all comes back to apathy. The tools are there with the internet, and you know, those are things that cry out about the human want and need for connection and sharing with their fellow man. It's just, we got to get over that apathy hurdle, and we got to start using the tools in the right way. That's what it's come to. It's time to shit or get off the pot.
Yeah, it can be broken down to that, succinctly. It's time to shit or get off the pot, America.
It's where we're at.
World. Yeah, so I mean, you know, and again, I've said this before, but we'll see. Let's wait and see. Who knows how it's going to turn out, but there's this slow movement towards progression and that utopia, that peaceful utopia, but my contention is, let's put it on the fast track, let's get in the fast lane, and maybe we'll spare millions of lives in the process.
Grab a couple buddies and get into the carpool lane.
Yeah, exactly.
Bypass all the bullshit.
Yeah, like all of the young people today, you know, everyone that's, you know, I don't know how to put a number on it, because it should be all of humanity, but just this younger generation, you know, if you're under 30, 35, whatever, let's all just say, you know what, fuck these old people that have done things in this archaic, barbaric way for so long, and we're getting, you know, let's pile up in the van, get in the carpool lane, and go to the show.
We're going beyond all that.
Yeah.
We're going to pass all that shit up, and we're just going to forget about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's my hope. Like, there's gonna be that my, you know, great grandchildren someday are gonna be in their little utopia, and they're gonna be reading into history. I'll say books, but probably the history, internet, computer, digital books, or whatever the fuck they have then. And
Kindles or whatever the hell.
They'll probably have it just implanted in their head.
Yeah.
But they'll be reading about these times when the
Suntory times.
when the barbaric times of human history really gave way to that, again, utopia. I use that word a lot, but I think it means something, because it's that peaceful paradise that we know we have the ability to create in this planet, but we haven't succeeded.
It's achievable right now. I mean, to quote some of our experiments in thought statistics, we could solve world hunger by cutting off like less than 1% of our military spending.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's a no-brainer to me, but I don't know. It's so complex with just the 7 billion people that are on this planet right now, and like just, you know, the avenues of power that it takes to be in position to actually make a macro change. Yeah. It's so convoluted, but it starts, like you said, with the individual finding peace within yourself, self-reflection, curiosity.
Just knowing who you are.
Yeah, it starts there, you know.
Another thing we like to touch on in these podcasts is the human evolutionary process.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that is key to breaking these shackles of barbarism and corporate slavery. It's like, you alluded to it, the slow progression. There is slow progression, and that's how evolution has always been. Mm-hmm. You know, takes course over who knows how long, hundreds of thousands of years or whatever the hell.
Yeah, long time.
But we're kind of to that point where evolution of ideas, that's kind of where we're at right now, is we can evolve at will, basically, if we are willing to be open-minded.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you're going to sprout some antenna out of your head and become some crazy enlightened bit. You know, it comes back to the self. It requires a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
But we are at a point where we can basically evolve at will.
I agree. Well, I think we're gonna be running out of time pretty soon here. Just want to wrap this one up.
Yeah.
Do you have any last thoughts?
Not really.
No.
Just be constantly vigilant and ready, for the time is nigh. Don't be walking around with your eyes wide closed. Don't be a dummy. Don't be a sheep. Don't have the wool pulled over your eyes. 'Cause before long, the powers that be will straight be shitting out their asses. Thank you.
Alright, well, I'll just leave with this then. We are off to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotions, visions, and pious action we do sugar over the devil himself. Goodbye.